Hey, it's Ozzy from Three Monkeys Amps and Three Monkeys Solderless, and today we're going to have some more fun abusing all available equipment. Okay, so we're still up in the submarine studio, and what I wanted to abuse right now are these pair of Hairball 1176 compressors. All right, so what are we doing? What's the idea here? What are we trying to destroy? So what we're doing is we're trying to get, obviously, that sound. But what is the chain? What are we using, and why are we doing it this way? And why did we even think of doing it this way? And what is it? All right, so let's just start off with the chain. All right, so what we've got right now is the 50 watt running into the load box, which is feeding this top compressor, which is then feeding this bottom compressor, which is then going into the line in on the Marshall 100 watt, which is then headed into the aux box and then off into the Mackie mixer and up into the camera. So why are we doing this, and what is the idea behind it? Well, here's the thing. It's like I'm chasing that sound as sort of like a hobby, right? It's been going on way too long, and I probably need to seek professional help, but whatever. That's life. So I've never heard a stock Marshall, guitar into stock plexi or metal face into greenback that sounded like that album. And conversely, I've never heard a modified Marshall that sounded like that album. So I was thinking to myself, there has to be another reason, right? There has to be some more ingredients. And obviously the studio is a huge factor into, how anything turns out sounding, the microphones, how the room sounds and everything, that's all part of it. But there are certain things that, the room size or the microphone can't really do. And that is make a normal Marshall sound like that. So I'm thinking to myself, there had to be more. There's definitely a different waveform than you would hear from a stock amplifier on that album. Okay, so what I was decided to do then is to take into account all the different variables that were present at the time, and two of those variables would be Ted Templeman and Don Landy. So I figured the secret is probably somewhere in there. So I started reading as much as I could online and elsewhere about, what was going on with Ted Templeman, like what were all of his other projects. And, I was really into Little Feat, and I had known that Ted Templeman had done that album. But what I didn't know was how he got like those slide sounds that he's famous for, or that Little Feat's famous for. Those slide sounds that just have no let up. It's like infinite sustain. Reading about that, I had found some, I guess, interviews or recollections or an anecdotal sort of like evidential passage where the trick was that there were two compressors, two Blue Stripe 1176 compressors feeding one another in order to get that infinite sustain. I had also heard that about Jimmy Page, that he had done something very similar to that to get the sound on Black Dog on the Zepp albums. So getting back to Templeman, I figured, hey, that kind of makes sense to me. It's like, because the sound to me on that album is like a Marshall, like a stock Marshall that just never gives up. It keeps going and keeps going and keeps going, and has this sort of like overlaying of like of almost a plasticky, almost square waved kind of sound to it that you just can't get. The diodes are close, because they're doing a very similar thing, compressing, and as voltages kind of rise, they keep forcing them down, so it ends up giving you a very level signal. kind of like, these leveling amplifiers do, these compressors do. So I figured, why not get a couple of 1176s and start messing around with them and see what they do. So instead of getting real ones, which are, astronomically expensive, I found the company Hairball Audio that builds, or rather sells the parts to build them. So if you've got some, electronic knowledge, you've got some good test gear, you know your way around the soldering iron, or, a signal generator, and, have some good meters, you can build and calibrate one of these things and end up with what I think is a pretty darn good representation of a Uri Blue Stripe 1176. So when I got them, I got one first, and I put it in a signal chain, and I was like, wow, this has something that I like about it. Something's right about this. So I figured, yeah, let's get a second one. So I got a second one and put them together, and then I slammed them together, and voila, I was able to get this infinite sustain that one compressor can kind of do, but two compressors can really do. So let's talk about how it's sort of like set up. What I've got, obviously, is this 50 watt feeding the load and then into that first compressor. And the way it's set up is I've got the attack all the way down practically, and the release almost all the way up, with a gain reduction of 20 to 1. So that's a pretty extreme setting. Now the second compressor that it's feeding into is set up kind of like almost in an opposite way. It has the attack up and the release down from where this one is. So the two together, they kind of create this, let's say, pump, where one is like feeding another when the other one's empty, and then it fills up again, and they're able to keep the buckets kind of level for an extremely long time. So you get what amounts to this stock Marshall, signal waveform that just stays there forever, and it never lets up, with the addition of a little bit of extra grit. That's a characteristic sound of the 1176, this grit, as well as a different pick attack, and a different sort of decay to everything. And I think it really does sound right. Now, these compressors I've usually had in a rack, and I was doing experiments with microphones, right? The microphones were feeding, a 5 series preamp, rather 500 series preamp, and then into the compressors, trying to mimic that sort of studio thing. This is the first time I've tried to do it this way, because I really wanted to find a way that you could use this live without having to have, microphones, miking cabinets, and, microphone preamps and EQs and all this stuff, where you really aren't listening to what you're playing, and you can't use it live. You can't use it for practice. It's very one-dimensional in that respect. And there's a clip on my YouTube channel of that setup for Feel Your Love, where I use this setup, but the compressors are in the rack, post the microphones and everything. So anyway, these are in between the two. Now, what I like about it, as I said, it gives that infinite Marshall thing, but it also allows the amp to clean up, which, like a very highly modified Marshall, has a difficult time doing. And those clean sounds tend to hold on for a long time too, which is a really good plus. So let's put the amps back on, and we'll show you how they sort of clean up, Guitar's a little tune sweetened for that particular song. So you can see how it really cleans up, and then you get on it, and it just keeps holding on for dear life. It also has a different kind of a pick attack, it has a sort of a different sort of thing going on there too. See, has that jump, 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 jump. That part, that kind of, where there's almost a harmonic on top of it, it really brings out that sort of subtle harmonic that's on that sound. So I definitely think these were part of that that operation there. So yeah, so that's sort of like fun with compressors, and I'm sure there's some guys that are actually engineers that are probably horrified by what I'm doing and that I'm doing it totally wrong, and that that's not how Templeman used it. And I would totally believe that because I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to this. I can build them, but I'm not, like I said, I'm not a record producer or an engineer by any stretch of the imagination. So if there is someone out there that's watching this and knows how it was done, shoot me a little comment below, and we'll, we'll see if I can replicate that sort of thing here. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. And I hope you guys had a little bit of fun watching me, do something that's kind of goofy and, not really done too often. So anyway, thanks.